Hey, what's going on, guys? So it's your boy Ryan Tillman here, and today I'm actually going to do something different with the video breakdowns. I'm actually going to do two video breakdowns, and the reason I want to do that is because I actually want to compare them. Now, although these videos are completely different from one another, there are a lot of things that we can learn, and as a police officer, we like to learn from the mistakes that we make, and that's the only way that's going to help us to improve our profession and improve us personally. So the first video that I'm actually going to break down today is a very controversial video, one that actually kind of started the whole Black Lives Matter movement, and there's a lot of other things that came from this incident involving police. What it is the Alton Sterling shooting that occurred in July of 2016. So as we're in July, we're approaching the 4-year mark, or actually the 3-year mark of when this thing occurred. So what I want to do is I'm going to play the video first, and then once you guys watch the video, I want to break it down.
Back on.
What you talking about?
Don't move, bro. Stop.
What I did? I'm saying what I did, son.
Don't move on. Shoot your. Put your hands on the car. Put your hands on the car. I'm gonna shoot you in your head. You understand me? Don't you move. I'm gonna shoot you in your head. You hear me? Don't you move.
All right, hold up, man. You hurt my arm. Stop. I'm saying what happened, man. Hold on, my hands is on the car.
Tase his ass.
You on the ground. Get on the ground!
Pop him again, Howie.
Hey, bro, get on the ground!
Okay guys, so now that we've come back from watching that video, that is a very hard video to watch. And the reason it's so hard is because I don't care what it is in life, death is always hard to view. I don't care what it is. And then one of the things that I always remember that somebody told me, he's a military buddy of mine, is he said, Ryan, if we saw the things that had to be done to have freedom in our country, it would be deplorable to watch. And there's no difference for police work, and this is one of them. So what we have here is we have Alton Sterling. He's outside of a convenience store and he's selling CDs. Somebody called the police and said that he was selling CDs and he threatened him with a firearm. So you have two officers that respond to the scene, and their job now is to find the person that was called on, and this being Alton Sterling in this situation, and they have to investigate, and what it appears to be is a criminal threat. Now, here in California, a criminal threat is a felonious crime, and I can almost guarantee it's the same thing in New Orleans where this occurred. Once they get there, they arrive and they actually see Alton Sterling, who fits the description of the person that was mentioned by the reporting party. Alton's wearing a red shirt and some khaki pants, and he's a bigger man. The officers approach him, and this is where the controversy actually starts. And the reason why I say it starts here is because the officers' initial actions on how they contact this person were very, I mean, if we want to really debate it, could have maybe been done differently. It wasn't professional at all, if you ask me. They cussed, and I've taken criticism before for saying that the officers maybe shouldn't have cussed at him. I want to tell you guys that as a police officer, I have cussed at people in my day job. Was it right? It probably was not right. And there was times that I've come back when I cussed at that person, I said, hey, you know what, maybe it wasn't, maybe I shouldn't have done that. You know what? I don't believe these guys should have been yelling at this guy the way they did, because, and not even just from a professional standpoint, but as a crisis negotiator myself, I've been taught that we can de-escalate situations just based on the tone of voice that we use. And these officers, I would say, didn't use the best tone of voice. They immediately started to cuss at him. Now, playing devil's advocate, I can see why officers may come out like that, because if you believe a person is armed, your adrenaline is already going to skyrocket. And again, being on the flip side of it, I've been in situations like pursuits, foot chases, where my adrenaline is now going through the roof, and it causes me to do things that I actually maybe should have taken back. So maybe that's why they did it. I don't know. I think that maybe could have been done better. But anyways, we move forward from that, and they start giving Alton Sterling some commands. Some of those commands were, hey, do me a favor, put your hands on top of the hood. What they are trying to do now is they are trying to gain control of this situation. They need to detain him so that way they can investigate. But remember, they went there with the knowledge that this person may be armed with a gun. Now, if he's armed with a gun, that's one thing. We don't even know if he's dangerous yet just because they haven't met him yet. So Alton Sterling, he is passively resisting their commands. And what I mean by that is he's not actually charging at the officers. He's not making any crazy, outrageous threats to the officers, but he's also not listening to the officers. And I tell everybody all the time that I talk to is listen to the officer's commands. If you want to make it out of a situation safely and alive, listen to the officer's commands. Well, Alton's not listening to their commands, and he's continuing to do what he wants to do. So this now leads to the officers having to decide how they are going to gain control of this situation and gain control quickly. What they decide to do is they actually decide to use a less lethal option, and in this situation they chose to use the taser. The taser is a phenomenal tool and it's a phenomenal resource, but the taser is not always 100% effective, which is why I've chose to be tased twice, because I want to know when the taser is effective and when the taser is not effective. In this situation, it wasn't effective. So you see them utilize a taser. Alton initially drops to his knees, but he's able to regain control and he hops right back up. So they actually, I believe they tried to deploy the taser a second time and it still doesn't work. So at that moment, you have one officer that decides to go and just use the hands-on approach and tries to gain control by rushing Alton and basically tackling him. This is what leads them to the ground, and now there's a struggle on the ground. So now this is where we approach that deadly moment where Alton Sterling loses his life. Officers believe there's a firearm in his pocket. As they're wrestling with Alton Sterling, you can see by his stature, he's a pretty big man, and it's pretty hard to take on, and we cannot discount that. A lot of times people want to discount the fact of how big a person is or how strong he is or what kind of capabilities he has. Well, Alton's a big man, and so they take him to the ground, and as they take him to the ground, they are trying to prevent him from going into his pocket, because as we know, when you reach into your pocket, you can brandish a firearm or a knife or anything or something like that, and now it puts everybody at danger. So they're trying to prevent him from going into his pocket, and you actually hear one of the officers say he's got a gun in his pocket, which tells me one of the officers actually saw the gun in his pocket. So they continued to wrestle with him, trying to restrain him, trying to gain control of his arms, and now Alton is now physically resisting these officers' actions. You hear one of the officers say, hey, he's going for the gun, and at this point, this is when one of the officers actually uses the deadly force and shoots him 3 times. Now, that force that he used was to stop the threat. Once he shoots him 3 times, you can still see Alton move a little bit, and he actually rolls over and sits up a little bit. He's away from the officer, so the officer still can't see his hands. So then you'll see the same officer actually shoot him 3 more times, and that's when now it appears that the threat has been stopped. This was not an easy video to watch. And you know what? Granted, maybe those officers could have been way more professional when they approached. But at the end of the day, one of the things I always say is we have to always fall back on police policy and case law. And in this situation, the case law, the officers are there trying to investigate a crime. If we measure that up with a 3-pronged test, which is what's the immediate or what's the severity of the crime, we're talking about a felonious crime now. The second one is he an immediate threat to officers or anybody else around? Well, I would say yes. He has a gun in his pocket, and we believe that he's also threatened somebody else. And the last prong is he physically resisting or trying to actively flee? Well, he is resisting in some sort of way. So now, if we take our measuring stick out, that's what people are looking at is, did the officers have a reason to contact him in the first place? And they did. Now, if we look at policy, I don't know what Baton Rouge's policy is, but I can tell you that maybe they might have been out of policy when it came to the contact and the professionalism. Maybe they weren't, but those are 2 different things. And so I did my homework with this one, and I actually looked up the Department of Justice's report, and they actually brought in 2 civil rights activists to evaluate this same case. And at the end of it, they actually determined that based on the actions of the officers, it was reasonable force. And this came from civil rights activists. And that baffles me, because I'm like, wow, so these are 2 people on the flip side of it that are actually trying to make sure that Alton Sterling gets the appropriate justice. And even they, after all the witnesses were interviewed, determined that it was reasonable force. You know what's funny is when this actually came out, we didn't see all of this stuff in the headlines, and we probably didn't get a breakdown like this. The breakdown I'm giving you, the breakdown I'm giving you is I'm taking it from my own personal experience as a street level patrol officer. I've had to use force on people. I have not had to use deadly force on people, but I've been either directly or indirectly involved in some type of lethal force. So now that I've broken that video down, I want to transition to another video. And this video is also hard to watch because, again, somebody gets shot, and it's never pretty to watch somebody get shot. The difference between the 2 videos, though, and in this case, you have an Officer Quincy Smith, that actually gets shot. And what we're going to watch is Officer Quincy Smith is actually responding to a grocery store, and because they believe that a theft just occurred from the store. So he exits the building. He actually follows a guy he believes to be the suspect because he fit the description. So I want you guys to watch this video, and we'll see what happens next.
Dispatch, Echo 7. I'll be out with that subject. Come here, man. Come here for a second. Come here. If you don't, you better stop, or I would. Come here. Come here. Stop. 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 Take your hands out your pocket. Take your hands out your pocket. If you don't stop, so I'm gonna tase you. I'm not playing with you. Take your hands out your pocket. Take your hands out your pocket. Take your hands out your pocket. Shots fired!
Okay, so now that we've watched that video is hard to watch. And the reason it's hard to watch is because we have an officer that gets shot, and not only does he get shot, but you can hear the panic in his voice. And that's kind of what's disturbing. And I believe, honestly, that's why people were disturbed, because whether or not Alton Sterling was committed a crime or not, which it sounds like he was, he's still a human being, and that's hard to watch as well. But if we transition back to Quincy Smith's situation, he's going there to investigate a theft, and this is a misdemeanor crime. Now, the reason he's telling him to take the suspect to take his hands out of his pocket is because, as I've told you many times before, if we can't see your hands, I don't know what's in your pockets, and I don't know if you're trying to harm me. Well, in this situation, that suspect was trying to do that. He was trying to harm Officer Smith. Officer Smith gives him multiple commands to take his hands out of his pocket, and he's still not doing it. So let's go back to our test. Let's go back to the three-prong test. What's the severity of the crime? Well, the severity of the crime is we have a misdemeanor crime. What's the next prong that we have? Is there an immediate threat to the public or anybody else? Well, we don't know at this point. All we know is we have somebody that's walking away from him. And the last prong is he actively fleeing or resisting? Well, I would say he's actively fleeing because he's walking away from Officer Smith's commands. So Officer Smith chooses to take out his taser because in his mind at the time of the situation, he deemed that might have been the appropriate use of force in order to gain control of this situation. Well, unfortunately, Officer Smith did not know what the suspect had in his pocket, and in his pocket he ends up brandishing a firearm, and not only does he brandish it, he actually ends up firing at Officer Smith. Now, Officer Smith is actually shot in his neck, and he's actually shot 2 more times. One time in his arm, and another time in I believe it's in his chest. Officer Smith immediately retreats to his patrol car, and this is one of the hardest parts for me to watch as a family man. He gets on that radio and he's pleading for help. And what we don't see in this video is because he was shot in his arm, he cannot access his firearm. He cannot try to defend himself because his arm is completely done at this point. And not only that, he's bleeding very quickly out of his neck. So he gets on the radio and you can actually hear initially he's like, hey, I need help. Hey, I need help. He gets back to his car and he's like, I need help. Selfless and doesn't have anything. He doesn't know what he's going to do. Later on during this video, which I don't believe I've shown, but Officer Smith eventually tells dispatch to tell his family that he loves him because he honestly believes he's going to die. Why is this video so important, and why did I choose to compare these two videos? Well, what we see in the first videos, we have 2 officers that are trying to prevent Alton Sterling from going into his pocket where they believe a gun is at. The second video, we have Officer Smith that is trying to remove a person or wants his guy to take his hands out of his pocket and stop so that way he can gain control of the situation. As officers, when we don't react proactively in trying to make sure we can see a subject's hands or we can put ourselves in a situation so that way we can be safe and the public can be safe, we take chances. And Officer Smith, thank God he survived that day, but that could have turned really bad and he could have died really quickly. And officers die every single day. I will tell you guys this. I vow to you to call out the bad officers, and I'm sure you guys have seen that. This situation in the Alton Sterling event, I believe that maybe the officers could have acted way more professionally. I don't believe they needed to cuss at him like they did. They probably could have used a better choice of words. But when it actually came down to them doing their job and actually stopping the threat that was presented to them, I believe they were within policy and within the law. When it comes to the Officer Smith incident, again, he was doing his job. He was trying to protect the immediate public. And the crazy thing about this situation is that if that suspect had enough courage, I don't even want to call it courage, if that suspect had the audacity to shoot an officer, what could he have done to the general population? So just take these videos that I've broken down for you today and just think about it. Like I said, this is not a Monday morning quarterback. All this is just I want to give you guys a little bit of knowledge from a police officer that's still currently policing the streets. And I truly believe that tomorrow I can be put in a situation that can be criticized. And you know what? By doing these videos, it's a little bit of a risk because they're going to come back to me and say, hey, you're the one that criticizes all these videos, and here you are now being criticized for your own video. I understand understand those risks. And you know what? Part of me is nervous about it, but I have a God that I serve that I believe is going to get me through every single thing I do. So thanks again. Thanks for tuning in to this breakdown of these videos. If you have any questions for me, reach out to me in my DM. Thanks again, and God bless.